Well, welcome to this lesson for CPI 111. We're going to do something a little different in this lesson. Today, instead of building a game, we're going to focus on a tool that allows you to create sprites that you can then import and use inside your game. And the tool that we're going to learn about, just the basics, is something called GraphicsGale. I've put a link where you can download the game onto the course Blackboard site, but here it is right here. There's a shareware version and there is a free version as well. The free version will work just fine for everything that you need to do in terms of building your game inside Game Maker. So before you go any further, make sure you have downloaded and installed GraphicsGale on your computer. Windows only, folks. Alright, we're going to build a sprite, and we're going to animate that sprite, turn it into a sprite sheet, and then bring it into Game Maker and add it to an existing game. Lots of things happening in this lesson, so let's get right to it. First, let me show you briefly the game that we're going to use to put in our custom-made sprites. It's going to be the Pyramid 8 game. It's from the last chapter in our course textbook, chapter 14. I've put a link up to the completed version of the game file on the Blackboard site, so you'll want to download and have that game file available. You don't have to build this game, although it's pretty cool. But as part of the lesson, you'll go in and replace the existing player sprite with your own sprites. All right, so let's get started. Looking quickly inside the Pyramid 8 game file, the main sprite for the player is a little guy walking along, sort of an Indiana Jones character. You're looking at him from the top. And all we really need to know as we look at this sprite inside Game Maker is that we're going to make our own version of the sprite, and we'll match this sprite in terms of its dimensions and in terms of the number of sub-images. So in terms of its dimensions, you can see it's 32 pixels by 32, and that there are 4 sub-images showing our little character walking along, which is what he does inside the game. So with that in mind, once you've installed GraphicsGale, please open it up and we'll begin to create our own version of the player sprite for the game. So I'm sitting here inside GraphicsGale, and the first thing I'm going to do is create a new image. And I'm going to set its dimensions to be the same as the dimensions we use for the game, for Game Maker, with 32 by 32, and in terms of color, I'll choose full color and say OK. When I do that, you'll see that I get this little tiny editing window. It's nearly impossible to work with because the dimensions of it are so small. So to make working with it much easier, you're going to want to zoom in on the view. So to do that, come up to the toolbar, to the magnification drop-down box, and choose 1500. Once you've done that, then expand out the window, and you'll see that it will make it much easier to work with. Also, inside your work area on the screen, inside GraphicsGale, make sure that you turn the grid on, and also I think it's a good idea to use the snap grid functionality, so I'm going to set that as well. Finally, before we get started, I want to open up and make sure I can see a preview window. So I'm going to go to View up on the toolbar, and you'll see all of the various windows that are showing. I'm going to make sure that I've selected Preview as an option. When you do that, you'll get a little preview window that appears. This window as well, you can zoom in by right-clicking on it. I'm going to set mine to 400, just to give a little bit bigger view than the real view, but to be able to look at the whole thing and how it will appear to the player. As we begin to draw our sprite, one nice thing that the GraphicsGale program allows you to do is to have multiple layers. So you can divide up your sprite into layer and make changes to an individual layer without impacting the other ones. Obviously, by default, it creates a single layer. I'm going to change the name of that layer just by right-clicking on it and choosing Properties. First layer I'm going to make is going to be the head for my character, so I'll just say, call it Head. Then I'm going to go ahead and start drawing. And you've got a pretty typical set of drawing tools up on the toolbar. For my character, I'm going to start off with a filled oval. And let's see what I'll do. Actually, I'll choose a not filled oval. And I'm going to choose a kind of a green color for the outside. And I'm going to come out here and just thinking about what I want this character to look like. I'm going to imagine that I have a character where I'm sort of looking down on it from the top, and it's going to be walking along. That's actually a little bigger than what I want, so I'm going to let's make it about like that. That's pretty good. As I'm making it, I want to have roughly the same dimensions to the left and right of my character, and I want it pretty much centered in the middle of my image. That seems pretty good right there. I'm going to go ahead and fill that now using my bucket tool, and I'll fill it with a darker color green, and I can see what it looks like in the preview. I'm going to imagine this is a kind of a space alien. Doesn't really fit the game that's inside the book, but that's okay. I'm going to choose, this time, a filled circle, and I'll give my character sort of a yellowish face. And I'll put the face about right here. Well, it's a little small. Let me make it bigger. When I'm redoing it, I'm just hitting the undo key on my keyboard. There we go. I'm going to give him some eyes. Using the pencil tool for this, looking down in the preview to get a sort of a better sense of what this is going to look like. One there, and one right there. That's not too bad. All right, let's give him sort of hair or a hat. I'm not sure how I'm going to think about it, but it's either going to be hair or a hat. Right up here. Looks pretty good. Put a little bit darker color in the middle there. Yeah, it's too hard to see. Let's make it even darker. Okay. So here's my character's head. You'll want to spend, obviously, more time drawing your sprite. Let me show you how I can begin to draw other pieces of this character and make use of the layers tool. So I've got my head layer. If I click on this down arrow, I can create a new layer. I'll call this one feet. Yep. And you'll see over here it adds the feet layer and it lists it first in this list. And as with many drawing programs, the order of these layers corresponds with how far forward the image on that layer is drawn and what order it's drawn. Things that are earlier in the list are drawn in front of things that are lower in the list. And in my case, I actually want my feet to be drawn so that they're underneath the head. So I'm going to swap spaces and have the feet show up underneath. For my feet, I'll use a non-filled oval, and I'd like to grab the same color that I have out here. Alright, so I've got my feet. I'm going to add a new layer, and I'm going to call this one hands. And I'll give my little alien guy some arms. Now, I'm terrible at drawing these, so... Alright, so there's my little alien character doing his walking move. He's walking forward there. Then what I want to do is, you can see down here I've got a single frame. And what I want to do is add other frames so that I can begin to assemble an animation that will play inside my game whenever I get into Game Maker. So I'm going to come up to the toolbar, and you'll see that I can choose to duplicate the existing frame, or I can choose to add a frame, and I can choose to duplicate left or right. So we're actually going to end up with 4 frames, and 2 of them are going to be the same image. So I'm just going to duplicate this frame, and I'll call it walk left 2. Okay. Then I'm going to duplicate it again. And this I'm going to call walk right 1. Okay, so what I'm going to do now that I've got this walk right 1 frame is I'm going to modify a couple of these layers. First of all, I'm going to flip the feet. So I'm going to go choose Image and choose Flip Horizontal, and then watch what happens. So now I've got the feet facing the other way, and I'm going to do the same thing with the hands. Image, Flip Horizontal. So I'm going to save my work, and then I'm going to export this out. So I'm going to come to File and choose Export. It's going to be a combined image, so I'm going to take all of the 4 frames, and then when I export it, I'm essentially creating a sprite map and a sprite sheet. And so I'm going to tell the software how many columns I want in that sprite sheet. And I've got 4 images, so it makes sense to have 2 columns. So I say OK. Then I need to make sure I notice where it is. I'm going to save it, give it some name, and then in terms of its type, I'm going to choose PNG. Then if I look out where I saved it, double click, and here's my little sprite sheet that I've got for my game. Okay, now that we have our sprite created, we're going to next learn how to bring that sprite into Game Maker and make it work inside an existing game. For this, we're going to use the Pyramid Panic game. This is the game that is in Chapter 14 of the course textbook. For this lecture, I have put the game file up on the Blackboard site, and you can download it from there. I've uploaded the complete version of the game file. It's also available, of course, on the CD-ROM that comes with the textbook. Let me show you quickly what it looks like in its default state inside the chapter. So we're inside a pyramid, and we can walk around, and what we're going to do is we're going to replace this little guy who's walking back and forth with our own custom-made sprite, the one that we just created in the previous part of this lesson. So let me show you how that works. So currently inside the game file, you'll see just a whole bunch of sprites. And what we're going to do is replace these 4 sprites. We've got the Explorer left, Explorer right, Explorer up, and Explorer down sprites. The key thing to pay attention to as we replace this sprite is that like the sprite we created in the previous part of this lesson, the dimensions of this are 32 pixels by 32 pixels. The collision checking has been modified, or the mask has been modified to cover the full image, and we're going to do the same thing when we replace it with our custom sprite. So to replace the sprite, we need to import the sprite that we've just created, and it's a sort of an unusual path to make this happen. To do so, we're going to create a new sprite, And I'll call this one SPR underscore Explorer down new. Then we are going to choose to edit the sprite, and which will open our Sprite Editor. Then we're going to go to File and choose Create from Strip. When you click on that, then you can navigate to wherever it is you've saved your sprite that you created. I've created a whole bunch of them, so I'll pull up the Alien 2 sprite. When I load that sprite, I get this window where I need to change some settings to make GameMaker understand how to slice up the images that are in the sprite sheet that I created. First I need to tell it how many images there are altogether, and then how many images there are per row. So there are 4 images altogether, there are 2 per row. The image width is going to be 32, and the image height is also going to be 32. With the image I created, I don't need to play with any of the other settings. I can just say OK. That's going to import and slice up those sub-images from the sprite I created in the earlier part of this lesson. One more thing we need to do is it's likely that when you bring in your custom sprite, the background is not going to be transparent. So you're going to want to change that so that it will look correct when you bring it into the room inside the game. Let's do that next. So just looking at these 4 images, I'm going to come to the menu and choose Images, and then I'm going to choose to erase a color. And by default, it's going to open up this window, make a color transparent, and it's going to select white, which is the background color. I can also click inside the original image if I want to erase a different color, but in this case white is the color I'm going to erase. Now obviously when you create your sprite, if you have a background color in the actual image part of the sprite that is the same color as your background, it's going to get erased too, so you'll want to be careful when you're creating that sprite. But in our case, we're fine. There's no white color inside the sprite itself. And you can see that in the preview of the new version of the image, that background has become transparent. When I do this, I'm going to make sure that this checkbox is selected so that I will apply the same change to all the sub-images in the sprite. And now I've got all of my images all with transparent background. I can take a look at my preview. It's going to be showing movement very quickly, and I can slow it down just to get a sense of how it will look actually in the game when the player is moving around. And then I'm going to say OK. Then I remember to match the existing player sprite in the game. I need to modify the collision checking, so I'll click Modify Mask, choose to do the full image, and say OK. And I'm going to take off Precise Collision Detection. So now I've matched perfectly with what is already in the game. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the existing Explorer sprites and I'm going to rename them. So I'm going to call them all, just put put an underscore BAK at the end of each one. The reason I'm doing this is so that the game will automatically read the new version of the sprites that I'm going to create, because I'm going to set them up to have the name that the original sprites had. So I've renamed the old sprites to sort of the back version of them. I'm going to open up the one I just created, and I'll get rid of this new at the end. Alrighty. Now we need to make the other versions of this sprite. We need to have a right, up, and down version. So I've got the down version already. Let's create the up version. To do that, I'm going to right-click on the existing down sprite, choose Duplicate, call it Explorer Up, and then I'm going to edit my sprite by transforming the image. And I'm going to flip it vertically. And say, OK. Now they're all facing up. Save that. Do the same thing for right and left. Duplicate. Edit sprite by 90 degrees. Take a look at the preview to make sure it's facing to the right. And finally, I'll make the left one. Alright, and just like that, I've created the new version of my sprites. I've got them named appropriately. And the last thing I need to do to make sure that they work properly is to come down to my list of objects and find my Explorer object. And I need to change the initial sprite that gets shown from the old version of the sprite to the new version of the sprite. Save it and then test it. Now you can see I've got my little character that I created. And without having to do anything really, he now works appropriately and walks his way along. So you're all set in terms of bringing in your custom-made sprite.